You finally get your invitation to apply. You're excited, you celebrate, and then the nerves hit because you've heard of people who've had their applications canceled. You worry if your application is complete, and this is totally normal. IRCC can cancel applications without giving you an opportunity to fix a mistake or add a missing document, but it's totally preventable. And today I'm going to go through the express entry completeness check so you can rest easy after you click submit. Hi, I'm Brooke. I'm a Canadian immigration expert, and I'm the founder of Navio. At Navio, we offer expert immigration advice without the law firm price tag. So follow along as I dive into each document and give you tips on how to complete the application forms to ensure your application passes the R10 completeness check. This check just reviews your documents to ensure everything required is included. It's not actually an evaluation of whether or not you meet the program requirements and are eligible. It's simply, is the document there? Is the information there? If yes, you pass. If no, your application's canceled, sent back, and your application fees are refunded. In those cases, unfortunately, you have to create a new express entry profile and wait for a new invitation. Alternatively, you can fight the cancellation in federal court, and there have been some successful cases where a federal court judge deemed IRCC's decision to cancel an application unreasonable, and that resulted in the application being put back into processing. Every express entry application goes through 3 stages. The first is the completeness check, like I just described. And once your application passes the completeness check, it goes before an immigration officer for evaluation on your eligibility. So that's whether or not you actually meet the program requirements and have the qualifications for which you were awarded points in express entry. And once that's complete, IRCC moves on to your admissibility assessment. And that looks at whether or not there are any reasons that you would be unable to be granted permanent residence, like a criminal record or a serious medical condition. And the admissibility evaluation is also completed for each of your dependent family members, whether they're accompanying or not. So that includes your spouse or common law partner if you have one, and any dependent children who are under 22 years old, unmarried, not in a common law relationship, and still financially dependent on you. In this episode, we'll focus on how do you pass the completeness check and make sure that your evidence demonstrates you meet the program requirements. When you receive your invitation to apply, you have 60 days to submit your complete application with all of your personal history details and supporting documents. It's a really good idea to start gathering documents, especially your employment verification letters, before you receive your invitation to apply. This gives you time to perfect them and organize them in a way that you are confident you have everything you need to pass the completeness check and prove your eligibility. In addition, you only have one upload field per item to provide documents, so you'll spend a lot of time merging and shrinking PDFs to be able to meet IRCC's file size restrictions. The first document you need to provide are your passports, and that's for you and every dependent family member, including your spouse and common law partner, whether or not they're accompanying you. And make sure you include copies of every marked page. I also add any status documents like work permits or resident cards for other countries. If you're living in a country that's not your country of citizenship, then you absolutely must ensure that you include proof you're a legal temporary resident in that country. You'll also need to provide proof that you've completed an upfront medical exam. Now, to complete an upfront medical exam, you need to contact an IRCC panel physician. Not just any doctor or your family doctor can complete this exam for you. It has to be with a specific physician, which you can find on IRCC's website with the search function to find a panel physician in your area. And when you book that exam, make sure you specify that it is an upfront medical exam. Some physicians will ask for your application number because in other PR applications, the medical exam is completed after you submit your file and have a file number. But in this case, you're applying before you submit your PR application. So you do not have a file number. You can provide your express entry profile number, but just make sure that the physician is aware you're requesting an upfront medical and you do not have a file number at this time because you are at the pre-application stage. Once your medical exam is complete, the panel physician sends the results to a centralized medical office. You don't receive them. You can access them through an access to information and privacy request if you really want to, but you don't need to provide the results in your application. What you need to submit with your application is the e-medical information sheet, which the panel physician's office should provide you after they complete the exam. Next up is police certificates. This is the number one document that results in cancellations of express entry applications, so pay close attention. You need a police certificate for every country you've lived in for 6 months or more in a row since you were 18 or in the past 10 years, whichever is more recent. And for your current country of residence, the police certificate must have been issued within the last 6 months. And for all other countries, the police certificates are considered valid as long as you haven't been back to the country that issued the certificate for more than 6 months in a row since that certificate was issued. And that's even if there's an expiry date on the police certificate. If you haven't been back to that country for 6 months or more in a row, then it's still considered valid for IRCC purposes. You'll need to include color copies of the police certificates and official translations if the certificate isn't in English or French. Police certificates are required for you, the principal applicant, your spouse or common law partner, and any dependent children who are 18 years or older. It's a good idea to start gathering police certificates before you receive an invitation to apply, but if you're not able to obtain the required police certificates before you have to submit, make sure you include a letter of explanation along with proof that you've made the best effort possible to get the document before that 60-day deadline. So in many cases, you can apply for the police certificate online and take screenshots of the application and the receipt, include that with your explanation letter. In some cases, you have to go in person, in which case there's often a payment receipt, so you can include that or request a confirmation from the police department that you've submitted the application. And if you receive the ITA and haven't yet applied for police certificates, do so as quickly as possible. And one final note on police certificates, there are some countries that will not accept an application for a police certificate without express request from IRCC. So in those cases, if you look at the instructions on IRCC website for obtaining a police certificate, and you need a certificate from a country that won't issue it until IRCC asks, then include a letter of explanation and a screenshot from IRCC's website that says, I will apply for this certificate once you've issued the request letter because it's required by the issuing country. Next, work experience, and probably the number one reason that people lose sleep while they're preparing their application. For Canadian Experience Class applicants, the number one mandatory document you need to include as proof of your eligible Canadian skilled work experience is an employment verification letter. This letter has to include very specific details like the period of employment, your title, the list of duties, your wages and benefits, and more. And you can grab a copy of our Express Entry Employment Verification Letter template in Navio HQ. It's your hub for all things Canadian immigration, built by experts at Navio and totally free for you. Get access with the link in the description. In addition to the employment verification letter, it's also highly advisable to include your T4s and notice of assessment from the Canada Revenue Agency, as well as any other documents like pay stubs that you have that prove your period of employment in Canada. And that's to demonstrate your eligibility. If you got points for Canadian experience and foreign work experience in your Express Entry profile, you need to provide this documentation for those periods of employment as well. So remember that you're proving eligibility and that you have the qualifications for which you are awarded points in the express entry system. And in your invitation to apply in the documents from IRCC, it breaks down your points so you can see when you compare your points to the comprehensive ranking system, you can see how many years of experience you were awarded points for, and make sure you are including sufficient evidence to prove that you actually have that experience. And this is part 3 in our 3-part CEC series. Parts 1 and 2 also include more details about how to select the correct knock code and relay the duties so they relate to the knock and demonstrate that you had the experience required. So check those 2 episodes out as well. Next up, education. If you received points for education, you have to include a copy of the original diploma or degree, and ideally your transcripts. Transcripts aren't required, but they're highly recommended. And if either of those documents aren't in English or French, you need to obtain a certified English or French translation to include with these documents. If you have a foreign credential you were awarded points for, you have your ECA and you provided the ECA information like the certificate number and the provider in your profile. And it's actually not mandatory to include a copy of it. I always do. I put the diploma first in my single PDF. I put the diploma first, the transcript, the translation, and then I put the ECA because you paid for it and I don't want to take any risks. So that's how I would compile your education. And if you graduated from a Canadian institution, then just a copy of the certificate or diploma and your transcript. Next is proof of funds. If you watch part 2 of our series, you'll remember that I mentioned you can put 0 in the proof of funds if you're applying in the Canadian Experience class. And if you've done that, when you get your invitation to apply, you won't be prompted to upload proof of funds. But if you did include a dollar value in your express entry profile, you're going to be prompted to upload proof of funds. So you can do that by providing a bank letter and click the question mark beside proof of funds in the document checklist so that you can see exactly the information that needs to be included in the letter from the bank, and merge that letter with 6 months of your most recent bank statements. Now, often we find that banks won't actually include all the details that IRCC requests. So if that's the case, you can include a letter of explanation with whatever letter you're able to get from the bank and proof that you asked for the letter to include all the documents specified by IRCC. And just explain in your explanation letter that the bank was unable to provide it. Often you'll request this by email, and so you'll have that email correspondence to be able to prove that you made best effort to get exactly the letter that IRCC requested, and you'll have the bank's reply saying, you know, we can't provide an average of your bank balance for the past 6 months. And in that case, that's why I suggest you put in your bank statements for the last 6 months, because that obviously can be used to manually calculate the average. If you're applying in the Canadian Experience class, you don't actually have to meet the financial settlement fund requirement. So alternatively, you can just upload a letter of explanation stating, I've been invited to apply in the Canadian Experience class and I am exempt from the requirement to demonstrate proof of funds. And if you upload that in the proof of funds field, that is sufficient. And that has been confirmed by IRCC as an acceptable approach. Next are family documents. If you're married, a copy of your marriage certificate is required, not the marriage license, the marriage certificate. And if you have dependent children, their birth certificates naming both parents are required. So keep that distinction in mind. Oftentimes, governments will issue 2 types of certificates. One birth certificate that just has the child's information, and the other one, which is often referred to as a long form birth certificate that names both parents. Include the one that names both parents. If you're divorced or separated, include proof, so a divorce certificate or a separation agreement. And if you're common law, you need to include the statutory declaration of common law union, which you can find on IRCC's website, Complete that form and have it signed in front of a notary and notarized. And make sure you also include proof of at least 12 months of cohabitation, whether it is a joint lease agreement, proof of bills directed to the same address for 12 months, joint bills. There's a copious amounts of ways to prove that you're in a common law relationship. So just make sure you provide a very clear and compelling case and evidence that you and your common law partner, if you're including one, are in a common law relationship that meets the definition set by IRCC. Finally, if you are including children who are from a previous relationship and that parent isn't accompanying you, then you'll need a declaration from the non-accompanying parent, as well as a copy of their photo identification and court documents that show you have the right to remove the child from the jurisdiction of the court. Those documents are needed if the child is accompanying you. If they're not accompanying you, you'll still be required to have them submit to an immigration medical exam. And I've seen this in the past where the other parent won't permit the child to undergo a medical exam. And if that's the case, make sure you include a clear explanation and demonstration of best efforts to have the child undergo the medical exam. So it could be copies of text messages or emails with the other parent, and submit that in place of the upfront medical exam for your dependent non-accompanying child. What will likely happen is IRCC will reach out during the processing of your application to request that the medical exam be done, and you'll have another opportunity to try and have that done at that time. Otherwise, IRCC will likely make you sign an agreement that says you will not apply to sponsor the child at a later date. So it is in the best interest to have the child undergo the medical exam if you want to retain that ability to sponsor them to become a PR if they want to come to Canada at a later date. But if you're not able to get the medical exam, your application can still go through, likely by you agreeing that you won't sponsor your child in the future. Finally, there's a field to upload documents if you have other names like official name change certificates, marriage certificates, etc., and the client information field. Now, the client information field is in the optional documents section, and it's often underused, but it's a super powerful upload field. And I highly recommend that you include a submission cover letter, because if you put your feet in the shoes of the immigration officer, they're processing hundreds of applications. They have no idea who you are, and preparing and submitting a cover letter with your application gives you the opportunity to build your story holistically in a way that gives the officer an overview of your situation, your eligibility, documents included, and to address any nuance that you might not be able to capture in the application forms, which have limited fields. The cover letter is also another place where you can explain your best efforts if you're not able to provide a document up front. You should have a document cover letter if that's the case, and you can actually add explanation letters as page 1 of every supporting document, especially if you have more than one document in a single PDF. Like I mentioned, education, you can have a cover letter that states I'm including the diploma, my transcripts, a translation, and my ECA, and you can have that as page 1 of the PDF document that you upload in the education field. And you can do that for most documents, especially if there's anything unique about them that you need to explain. I highly recommend that. And additionally, use the client information field to give the whole picture of your application and tie everything together. You want to position your application in a way that makes it really easy for the immigration officer to say yes. And I recommend that you highlight your eligibility, why you are qualified in the Canadian Experience class, and point out all of the qualifications you have for which you awarded points in express entry. Basically, do the job for the immigration officer so that all they have to do is check your work and agree. And inside Navio HQ, which you can access by the link in the description, you can access our AI letter builder, which I've trained to draft letters for IRCC applications. It's just a draft, but it helps you prepare a letter that will assist the immigration officer in reviewing and evaluating your file. So if you follow these tips and you prepare a strong, compelling document package, your application is likely to pass the R10 completeness check, which ensures it actually gets in front of an immigration officer and assessed for eligibility and admissibility. Just a few more notes before we wrap up. When you receive your invitation to apply and access your application, you'll be prompted to fill in all of your application forms first before you can move on to the next section of the application, which is the document upload fields. So make sure you identify the documents you'll need using IRCC's completeness check, which I'll link in the description, and start gathering those documents while you're filling in the forms. You don't want to wait until you've filled in forms to then move on to the next section and realize that you need to gather documents and run out of time. Additionally, when you're filling in the forms, you need to make sure that everything is consistent. So the biggest mistakes or gaps that I see is that people don't include 10 full years of personal history. You need to account for every period of time in the last 10 years in your personal history. And then you also need to provide 10 years of travel history and 10 years of address history. And make sure those match, because if there's any discrepancies, IRCC will notice. There was a case I can remember where an individual said they were working in one location, but their address was in another location, and they were too far apart for it to be reasonable that that person commuted to work. So IRCC actually refused the application. Rather than stating, hey, this doesn't make sense, can you help us understand? They asked the person to fill in the Schedule A form multiple times, which they did, and then ultimately refused the application because they didn't tell the applicant why they were requesting for the Schedule A form to be filled in again. And so the person didn't know that there was confusion around you're living in one place and working in another. When in reality, the person was working remotely and just flew to the physical work location occasionally for in-person meetings or what have you. And again, if anything like that is true for your situation, make sure you address it in your cover letter that you upload in the client information field. That's a perfect example of the type of detail that's really hard to capture in the forms because you're limited in character space and it doesn't provide you with a space for additional explanation. So that's what would go into your client information cover letter. Furthermore, make sure that all of your supporting documents match the details in your application forms. So the dates on your employer verification letters needs to match the dates that you put in your personal history and work history section. Remember, the work history section is just the periods of employment that you want to be considered for your eligibility and your express entry rank. And then everything else goes into your personal history section. And you'll actually notice when you get the invitation to apply, everything that you put in your express entry profile work history will be populated into the personal history. So you don't have to copy that information. You just need to fill in all the gaps. And it's okay if there are overlapping things, as long as it makes sense. And again, address it in your cover letter. And if there's any periods of time where you didn't have a permanent address, for example, you still need to make sure you have the address. And you can even put no fixed address in the address field. And again, explain in your submission letter. If you were backpacking or if you moved to a new country and you were staying in a hostel or a hotel for a period of time, that's okay. Do the best you can to capture it in the form and then address it in your submission letter. And finally, in your travel history, again, make sure it aligns with everything else in your personal and address history. And also make sure that you've captured the travel history details very accurately, because if there's any period of time that looks like you've been in a country for 6 months or more in a row and you don't provide a police certificate, IRCC could cancel the application as incomplete, even if you weren't actually in the country for that full 6 months. So be mindful of that, and anything you need to explain, put it in your submission letter. Finally, double check that your ECA was issued within the last 5 years and that your language test results are no more than 2 years old. You can follow everything in this video to create an application package that's going to pass the completeness check, and log into Navio HQ with the link below to access the employer verification letter template, and comment below if you'd like me to send you the file structure template we've created for each family member to help you keep all your documents organized and make sure you don't upload a file in the wrong field. If you're looking for guided execution, Navio platform gives you access to our structure and system for preparing and submitting the best application possible. And if you found this video helpful, share it with a friend and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.